Oh, ACNFers, we are less than 5 weeks away from the publication of The Frontrunner, oh boy. So be sure to secure yourself a pre-order while supplies last. Call now. But seriously, go to your bookseller of choice and maybe pre-order it. Well, and it's almost time to just straight up order it. Also, from May 21st to June 1st, the Archer City Writing Workshops at the Larry McMurtry Literary Center in Texas are having a workshop called Feature Writing, the Reconstructed Narrative, led by Kim H. Cross, Hampton Sides, and Glenn Stout. Visit lmcmurtrylitcenter.org/events to learn more. And no, I don't get any kickbacks or commissions, so get your cynical head out of your ass. It's not always about the money, man.
You know, as a reporter, you're like, he did months of reporting to write that one sentence. Mm-hmm. That's so nerdy to read books like that, but that is how I read books, is where I'm like, oh, I see how you did that. That's crazy.
Well, we did it. We did it again. Dude, the second live taping of the Creative Nonfiction podcast happened at Gratitude Brewing, the podcast where I talk to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. I'm Brendan O'Mara, your CNF and spin instructor who doesn't stop mid-ride and stand in the pedals and yells at you. I ride all the time with you. Thank you to Gratitude. This is with Leah Sottile, making her fourth. I think it's her fourth. Doesn't matter. Return to the podcast. This time to celebrate her new book, Blazing Eye Sees All. Love is One, False Prophets, and the Fever Dream of the American New Age. It's published by Grand Central. I'm holding a hard copy that I bought with my own two hands, had Leah sign, to raffle off the listeners who follow the Instagram page. I put out a few rules, you know, the classic. Like this, follow this, tag someone, and you're entered to win. One person did it correctly. Nice to see that the image got next to no impressions, even though between Leah and I, there was a combined like 2,500 total people it could have gone out to. And like 10 people liked it. And one person followed instructions. So, the writer, Lori Sebastianetti, appears to be the clubhouse leader. When one raffle ticket gets entered, is it even a raffle? Leah, man, it's crazy how this podcast gives me a real sense of kinship and friendship with the people who have been on the show. And I've met maybe 10 or 20 of them. I met Leah for the first time this past weekend, and it was like we had known each other for years. In a way, we kind of have. But we met, and just as if we hadn't seen each other for a few months versus, say, the first time ever. Pretty cool. Show notes of this episode and more at BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey, there you can read hot blogs and sign up for the monthly Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter. I'm getting more and more ragey CNFers. So if you want book recommendations, cool links, and good cheer, sign up. First of the month, no spam. As far as I can tell, you can't beat it. And there's also a weekly companion pod stack at creativenonfictionpodcast.substack.com. If you want the transcripts and the text of the parting shot and some deep dives into the archives, just to remind you of the wealth that's way back there that you're too lazy to look up. No shade intended. It is a deep backlog. This is the newsletter to enrich your podcast experience. I think it's pretty cool. You should totally mainline it. Leah Sottile is a freelance journalist whose work has appeared too many places to name, but here's a couple. The Atavist Magazine, High Country News, Outside Magazine, and The Washington Post. She's the lead producer, reporter for Bundyville, Burn Wild, and Hush. Her latest podcast with Oregon Public Broadcasting. She's the author of the Oregon Book Award finalist, When the Moon Turns to Blood. And I hate to say it, but I'm sorry that the frontrunner will be going head-to-head with her for the Oregon Book Award. It's Prefontaine versus New Ageism. It doesn't get any more Oregon than that. In this conversation, Leah and I talk about the work of John Vaillant, see episode 376, how writing this book made Leah crazy, how New Ageism and far-right extremism overlap, sagging middles, and not re-victimizing sources, among other things. Great stuff here, and a parting shot on playing not to lose. But for now, here's my live conversation with the one and the only Leah Sottile. Riff.
For me, it was like this record scratch moment.
Oh man, I wrote that.
But I'm also perpetually in fear of a moment when I don't have an idea.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
All right, parental advisory, explicit lyrics coming your way, no doubt. All right. Now, Leah and I, we've talked many times on mic and never in person, so this is really great. And I think a fun place to jump off of. In an essay you recently wrote for Elle, you alluded to a moment where you felt like your career wasn't getting on that rocket ship yet. Like, you just that tire spinning. And that really speaks to patience and having to be patient in this line of work. So how have you just navigated that patience that it is inherent to doing creative work, and specifically freelance journalism and long-form journalism?
It's a great question because I don't know that I am patient. In fact, I think I was just complaining about this week to my husband, like, when is this going to get easier? It doesn't. I think that I know that I am programmed to do this. I do feel that journalism is a little bit of an addiction, and the rush of it is big. And every time I say, like, I'm not going to do it anymore, which I have said, right. I know that I'm just like lying to myself, first of all, but also the next good story that comes around, like, it's just irresistible to me. So I get really impatient with the industry of journalism, and I get impatient with how a person like me fits into it. We're past the time of like magazines that wanted to have long form journalism, and there are still some, but there are a few, and they don't pay great. And I'm not going to write an investigation for $200. Like, I can't do much with that. So I get impatient with that, but I think that with each successive project that I've done that I'm proud of, there's been someone on the other end that felt that it was helpful. So whether that's like the subjects of the book or people in the communities that I write about that felt seen or heard, or like somebody didn't come in and, try to like generalize their community, which I think is another big impatience I have with, the industry of journalism. I think that that's just kind of what keeps me going.
And I always love getting a sense of film study. And I use that term just like as an athletic term. Coaches will go to the tape and they break down various defenses or offenses, and to get a sense of how the inner workings of something works. I love getting a sense of how a writer might look when, be it audio or print, and you look at something in the film study that goes on where you're really breaking down a lead, a middle, a kicker. What's your film study look like when you're breaking down a piece that really inspires you?
I've thought of a lot of times when I teach, like I am leaning hard on a lot of old, long form journalism that I really love. And, I'm not a great study of like what's happening right now. I think just like anybody, I'm kind of not sure where the good creative nonfiction is happening. Like I listen to your show to find those things. I think for me, a scene that really hits for me. Like I do really love the way long form journalists can play with time and reality. So for example, this is not an idea unique to me, but the way that you can make like a year be a sentence and a second be a whole paragraph, like that really excites me, where you can, slow down time and keep the reader in, almost like flag to them. This is very important. You need to understand this moment. I love that. And that's, for a while, I did breaking news for the Washington Post. Like I was just a stringer in Oregon, but I covered a lot of protests. And I think that's why, because I really liked that idea of putting people in a scene and trying to make them feel the energy and excitement of that scene. So for me, it's all about scenes.
Are there any particular pieces or writers that you revisit to kind of relearn how it's done, inspire yourself, be like, that's how it's done?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Right now, the person that comes to mind for me is John Vaillant, who wrote a book called Fire Weather. If anybody hasn't read that book, it is life-changing. It truly is. It makes you look at the West and wildfire really differently. There are some scenes in that book, I'm like getting tingles right now just thinking of them, where I'm like reading this and just blown away by the reality, but also by the writing. Like that to me is like, that's the spot. That's what I'm always trying to get to. So John Vaillant's written a few books. He wrote one called The Golden Spruce that is really good. So for me right now, that's what like, he's kind of my true north in a way, where I'm like, I want to write like that.
Yeah, that book is incredible. It was a National Book Award finalist a year or two ago, too, maybe last year. Yeah, I was really struck by the opening of that book. Just the pacing of it is like impeccable. It's like, this is a roadmap to how to do this.
Yeah, I mean, and just like the meticulous reporting that went into it. And like, you know, there are lines in that book where, you're, you know, as a reporter, you're like, he did months of reporting to write that one sentence. That's so nerdy to read books like that, but that is how I read books, is where I'm like, oh, I see how you did that. That's crazy. Like, I respect that sentence.
And kind of piggybacking on the whole patient theme from a moment ago, sometimes I love getting a sense of, you know, what a successful writer or a journalist looked like to you, you know, maybe at the start of your career, and how that's evolved as you've been in it for so long.
It's such a good question. I think that I thought that if you were a good enough writer, you could like feed yourself at a minimum. So now I see things, you know, I am obviously I'm able to feed myself, but it takes a lot of hustling. Yeah. And I think that for me, success means that people want to know your perspective on a thing that's happening, you know? So I feel that, you know, I'm actually going to surprise myself by saying this. I think that I feel successful because there are times where a thing happens in the West and someone far away will say, hey, what do you think about this? Should we write about that? And I'm like, hey, okay, like this feels successful to me. So to me now it's about like subject matter expertise. I think that feels successful, and also occasionally getting enough money to, you know, pay your bills is successful.
Yeah, and so many of your projects they're massive, be it through audio or books or long form reporting for a magazine. Like, how do you budget your time over the course of a year to stick the landing on a Hush, a Burn Wild, and then in the midst of it, you're writing, you know, 2 books also. So, like, how are you budgeting your day on a micro level, but a macro level too?
I really like to work, so it's not. I think, yeah, I do work a lot. But I've kind of created a life where that's possible. Because to me, work is it's more than just like producing fact-based journalism. It's about me trying to figure out the world. So yeah, I mean, I wake up in the morning, I have a cup of coffee, and then I get to work. You know, right now that means that I do a lot of work on Hush, which is the podcast I'm making with Oregon Public Broadcasting. It takes a lot of time because there's a lot of records requests that you need. There's a lot of phone calls to be made. So I try to, you know, get that stuff done. But yeah, when I also, you know, there was a moment where I was writing Blazing Eye Sees All. I was working on the first season of Hush, and I was working on articles for High Country News. Those were some anxious days. But, you know, I really just, I work backwards from deadlines. So I know that any story I work on will have to have like a lot of historical context and research. It needs good scenes. You know, I might be going on the road to get a scene, whether that's just like what it looks like at an intersection that's going to play a role in my story or things like that. But yeah, it's kind of a mix of reporting to the very last minute to put off writing. And then when I have to write, having a panic attack, and then like booking a hotel room for a week and not leaving that room. This is a thing I have done until I figure it out. So that's, yeah, I have kind of an intense process when it comes to writing. Like I just, you know, I become very difficult to be around until the writing is done.
How does that difficulty manifest?
It just means that everything feels like an imposition, where I'm like, I need time to think, like I need to be left alone. So, but to me, like writing the whole, like I do love reporting. I love the chase. I love, you know, interviews. I love meeting people and going to new communities and meeting, you know, people who are unlike me. The writing part is where the magic is for me. Like I really get excited about that. And, book writing has made me realize how much time you need to write something that excites other writers, or that readers appreciate, the craft of a sentence. That just takes a lot of time. So
when you're reporting, is there anything that gives you anxiety or pause about any part of that, process, be it cold calling, door knocking, what gives you, the heart palpitations? Because I've got something that gives me mine, but I don't want to imbue that on you.
Well, I'm curious what yours are, actually, because not a lot gives me, I do really, I like knocking on doors.
Oh, that's great. Good for you, Leah.
Sorry, let's talk through it. Let's talk through your issues.
Well, I hate cold calling.
Yeah, cold calls are hard.
Yeah, I hate the 20-second salesmanship that you need to go if you even get them on, if you're not even leaving a voicemail. Like voicemail, thank goodness for that. I'll often have a script up that I read from to make sure that I'm getting everything I can in like 15 to 20 seconds, trying to sound as warm and not telemarketery as possible. But I'm living in fear of the person who's just telling me to fuck off and never call me again. I'm going to come, sue you.
Yeah, right, sure. A threat of a lawsuit is not a thing that I like, but
those are great.
I think that I don't know. Sometimes I sort of do a thing where I'm like, "Hi, my name's Leah. I'm a reporter." Sometimes I've started saying journalist lately because sometimes I've had people construe like I was a reporter for the state or something. That's happened enough times where I'm like, okay, I have to say journalist. So I'll say, "Hi, I'm Leah. I'm a journalist." This call is totally out of the blue, and sorry to lampoon your day, but I'm curious, did you know this person in 1965? And sometimes people really like that. They're like, what a surprise for my day. But I've had people hang up on me and, say unkind things.
Yeah. And they'd be like, how did you find me? And I was like, oh, well, there's kind of this online phone book. And then
I always say the internet.
Yeah.
The internet helped me find you.
Yeah. I use that. Do you use Fast People Search at all?
No, I use Family Tree Now.
Family Tree Now,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, with Fast People Search, you can actually have your name removed from it, but I never tell sources that.
Right,
yeah. But like pro tip, that's a great one.
I mean, it's very easy to find people. And if there's, if people aren't on whitepages.com, you can find them on Facebook.
Yeah. And, classmates.com is a great resource for yearbooks. And you just find all these people. But Facebook's great, too. And if you're looking for class reunion pages and you find that admin, and that person is the node to like 400 people. Often that's the juice there when you get a roster of people. You're like, all right, I'm just going to...
This just got really nerdy really fast.
Yeah. Oh, my God. Yeah.
How do you professionally stalk people?
Yeah, exactly. I know. People would be very surprised how easy it is to find them. And But that's our little secret.
Yes.
Take me to the moment when you're writing the book proposal in a miner's cabin in Montana for your latest book. Just put us there as you're starting to think through what's going to become the next book.
Yeah, so I am a workaholic, but I'm also perpetually in fear of a moment when I don't have an idea. So I had finished up When the Moon Turns to Blood. I can't remember if it was actually published yet. I had a nugget of an idea for another book. And so, like I was explaining earlier, I need time and space. I need to be left alone. And I happen to know some people in Butte, Montana, who run a writing residency there called the Deer Butte Residency. So I applied for that, and they said, yeah, you can come and stay for a week. And it was great because the temperature became 30 below, and you couldn't leave. And I was at the top of a hill, and it's a hard day when Butte, Montana, you can't drive. That town can pretty much put up with any sort of snow, but I couldn't go anywhere, and I had this idea, and so I just sat there and knocked it out. And the impetus for me was, I had kind of brushed up against New Age ideas in a few different ways in my reporting, in my life, and I started kind of digging into the history as I like to do, and I read about Helena Blavatsky, who was this woman in the 1850s who was big in the spiritualist movement in America. So I just thought, well, if I can write a pitch around her, I really thought that the book would be kind of primarily about her. And like, here's this, you see crystals and kind of new age vibes everywhere. And here this woman is sort of the genesis of those ideas. So I stayed in that cabin and I wrote about Blavatsky until I couldn't anymore and left pretty much with a book proposal.
When you're starting a book proposal, like what are a lead domino, so to speak, that really gets grease the skids to get going?
Right now, I feel like I'm trying very hard to come up with another book idea. So I'm like, I don't even know how to write anymore. But I think in this case, it was just seeing some sort of historical relevance that could explain a moment that is modern. So in that case, there's a lot of different things to talk about with like the idea for this book. But for me, I was just kind of trying to understand how New Age ideas became so ubiquitous and like why I was seeing them on social media so much and why there was sort of this surge in COVID around, health coaches and spiritual gurus and things like that. So for me, when I encountered Blavatsky's story, I thought, well, maybe this is the historical thing that can answer that. So I think I'm always looking, or at least I have in the last few years, that's always been the first domino, as you say. I don't know that it always has to be that one, but that's something I can turn to time and time again for new ideas.
Well, and when there are certain characters in the book as well that have been featured, be it documentaries or in books, over the decades. And so how do you bring a fresh perspective to something that has been done before in some capacity?
Well, I think in this case, a lot of the people that I was interested in either hadn't been written about in a big way or they had been sort of cast aside as a little bit of a joke. So one theme I think of the characters in this book is they are women who were spiritual leaders in some way, whether or not, they were likable. But they all were like on talk shows at some point. So like one was on Oprah, another was on like a Ted Koppel news program, one was on Merv Griffin. They were all just sort of sideshow acts, and for good reason. But I think that what became interesting to me was that was sort of where the media left them, was sort of like a curiosity of society. And I think that that's a big theme in my work, is treating people, communities, ideas that are just kind of like, that's weird, like brushed off by mainstream media, where I come in and, ask more questions. So like with this book, specifically the woman who was on Merv Griffin, her name is Jay-Z Knight, and she channels a spirit called Ramtha. I'd known about her for a long time, and I was interested in the way she'd been portrayed in media, and the fact that no one ever really wrote about that, like thousands of people would come to her events in like countries all over the world. I think media was so like coming down as like, this lady is dumb, that they weren't seeing like why it was attractive to people. So that's kind of, where I sort of rely on that zone.
Yeah, what are the conditions that make certain people susceptible to, following these guru types, these new age types?
From the reporting that I did, I think that there's a couple of things. So a lot of the people in there's like a modern context to this book. I think a lot of people were looking for answers around COVID and were really afraid of what was going on in the world, for various different reasons. They had a sort of fatigue in their own life going into COVID, and then COVID either made work really hard or, homeschooling their kids really hard, and they just were desperate for community. So I think that's one thing. But historically, I think a lot of these people found purchase specifically with women, because the spiritual ideas that they were preaching were giving women power in a ways that you would not find maybe in more traditional spiritualities. So to me, that's like interesting and exciting and subversive and worth talking about in a big way. Yeah,
what is aside from gender, the connective tissue, say, between the Fox sisters, Helen Blavatsky, Elizabeth Prophet, and what was it,
Jay-Z Knight,
Knight, and then Amy Carlson too. You see this. There is a thread there, and there are beads on that thread.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the common ideas are, God is in you, God is a woman. sense of personal power, that you don't have to farm out your spiritual decisions to other people. That's, one big theme in the New Age, which is like a huge umbrella for a lot of different things, is just engaging in practices that give you personal power. I think each of these people are charismatic in a way and curious in a way that I think attracts people. But as the book talks about, they also pretty much all of them have a history of talking about, anti-Semitism. They have anti-Semitic ideas. They have hyper-nationalistic ideas, sometimes outright racist ideas. So those are also things that I think are in the background of the New Age that I, as a reporter, was trying to understand this world of love and light and goodness. Then how is it all those things, but also exclusive and bigoted?
For sure. And you're someone who's covered the far right for so many years. What have you noticed as to use that connective tissue again between the New Ageism but also far right extremism?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of things. And I'll be honest with you, when I started writing this book, I was explicitly trying to not write a book about extremism. Like, I was trying to take a break from it because it's a very exhausting way to spend your time if you're a journalist and you're a person like me. So, some of my background is like, I never really meant to do this. Like, I was a music journalist. Like, that was my thing. Extremism kind of fell in my lap and became really politically relevant, and I, went with it. So after my first book, which is about extremism within the LDS church and, a lot of really violent stuff, I was like exhausted and very like, I need a break. I just want to like think about people who like crystals and like are down with aliens. And that is what this book is. But as I did my reporting, I started to kind of just like run head on into anti-Semitism and racism. And I was like, oh no,
not again.
I have found an extreme, I did not mean to do this, but I don't really know what to make of that other than I think I'm just kind of like a bloodhound for this stuff. Like, I just sniff it out, and that's what I was doing there. There's a lot of intersections. I think that sometimes people, including myself, get caught up in the aesthetics of the far right. You can see a guy wearing camo and carrying an AR-15 and be like, well, that's what that looks like. You could see people within the New Age movement that are wearing like yoga pants and carrying crystals in their pockets and think it's different. What I found is that, this book kind of occurs at the intersection, I think, where the supposedly far left and far right meet and share ideas. And I think that we started to see a lot of that during COVID, that people were finding common cause with each other, specifically around vaccines and, what Dr. Fauci was telling people to do. People who maybe wouldn't have been in bed together all of a sudden realized that they were allies.
Speaking of that, all these various leaders, you wrote in a recent essay that, power is held by those who claim it. And I think that's got to be part of the appeal, that some of these leaders who might be pushing up against patriarchal structures are just saying, like, screw this, I am going to go forge my own path and claim some power and build some followers, all the more leveraged by social media now.
Yeah, I found that really interesting about Helena Blavatsky. So at one point, she was this person who would kind of perform tricks, and say, oh, it's because I'm getting messages from the masters who are telling me, what you need to do. And, she would do things like, there were bells would ring, and she'd be like, it's the masters listening to us. So late in life, as she was getting older, she kind of gets found out. And including one very funny scenario with a journalist where the masters are, those bells are the masters listening, and she literally drops the bell on the floor and picks it up. And this journalist calls her out and says basically you're a fake, just say it. And she's just really nonplussed by that. And it's in order to rule men, you have to deceive them. Sort of a shrug. And I just thought, God, that's so interesting. I think, as a person who has grown up in America as a woman, this is a society that I think I've been waiting to give me some power, and it never does. In fact, just keeps taking it away. So why not just take it? You know, and I think that that's one thing that I think is really interesting about all the women in this book is like there are some objectively bad, predatory things that each of them does or continues to, but each of them created a space of power for herself, and I thought that's very interesting.
How did you establish a through line and a narrative backbone for this book that goes into so many different places that on the surface don't feel cohesive, but you make it cohesive?
Yeah, I figured if I could I'm glad to hear that, because there was a moment where I was like, this feels crazy. Like none of this makes sense. So if it makes sense, that's great. I think that in addition to Blavatsky, one early interest for me was the story of Amy Carlson, who was the leader of a group called Love Has Won in Colorado. She died in 2021. And all of the stories I read about her very dramatic death were kind of people and journalists repeating, she believed she had been reincarnated over 500 times, that she had lived as Cleopatra and Joan of Arc and the Queen of Lemuria. And, as a journalist, I was like, what is Lemuria? Like, what I found out is that it's like people believe, like Atlantis, that there's this lost civilization that dropped into the ocean. And it was a spiritually realized utopia that, human sin basically destroyed. So, it stuck in my mind because I was like, this is not a real thing, and it's being reported by journalists like it's a real thing. But then also, the more reporting I did, I realized she was not the first person to say that she was the Queen of Lemuria. There was other people in the spiritualist movement and in New Ageism who had, claimed these like ties, familial ties to this place. So that was one through line. And I think that, the more I dug in, I started to just sort of realize there were a lot of shared beliefs, sometimes so shared that like they're just outright stolen. So the book, goes through history and kind of shows this lineage of theft, of just outright plagiarism by these female leaders, where they're like, ooh, I really like this. I'm just going to like revise it a little and call it, instead of calling them masters, I'll call them ascended masters. And so it was mostly the ideas that I think gave the book its backbone.
Yeah, and Amy Carlson, she was born in Kansas, kind of raised in Texas, and meanders her way west to Colorado, where she really creates a base. But there's a Eugene overlap.
There is a Eugene overlap.
Talk about
that.
Yeah,
I can't remember what the name of it was sort of looked like a kind of hippie collective of people all living together and, living in community, sharing food, sharing, resources, raising children. Maybe it was called Dancing Heart, I want to say. Okay, all right. Did that sound familiar to you?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, yeah. No, I mean, like, when you read it, had you heard of it?
No,
okay.
I had never heard of it.
Yeah, so I tried to find those people. I couldn't find them on web pages.
Mm-hmm.
But, so that was a little bit of an affirmation for me, because I think some of my earliest knowledge about like the New Age movement was just from growing up in Portland and coming to Eugene. My brother went to the University of Oregon. I had tons of friends that came here. So, coming down and sort of having like a sense of the kind of hippie roots of the community, and that, people do live in community and things like that. So Amy's journey, I think, is really interesting, because you see her sort of going around to different places. She came to Eugene. She went to Mount Shasta. She spent time in Ashland. She went to Sedona. Like, she was kind of dabbling in all these communities where this is like, it's just a part of the culture of the place. She wanted to be a part of that.
Yeah, what was it about the Pacific Northwest and maybe even Mount Shasta that spoke to the entire movement, but even Love Has Won?
I mean, so there's, I think, two ways to answer that. There's the journalism way, and then there's like the New Age mindset way. So like the journalism way is like, have you ever seen Mount Shasta? It's amazing. Like you go there, it's so striking. It pops out of the landscape, historically back to, the Wilkes expedition that mapped the Northwest. Like there have been people who've just been really struck by that mountain. And so to me, that's the journalism answer. The New Age answer is that it is it's one of the Earth's chakras. So there's a system of chakras, like, people apply to the body in yoga that people also apply to the earth. And so it's a power center. It's a place where some people will say, ley lines come together, and that those are places that are spiritually charged. In even more extreme ways, people who believe in Lemuria believe that Mount Shasta was a part of Lemuria. They believe that there's a Lemurian city within the mountains. So a lot of ways to answer that question.
I love how you describe it as Shasta is wide and unignorable, a chaotic lump of stiff meringue thwacked down from the sky. All alone, it commands attention. I loved your phrasing of that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to make sure that Mount Shasta was a big part of the book because I did a lot of reporting there, but pretty much all of the people that are in this book applied some kind of spiritual significance to Mount Shasta or even ran their operations from Mount Shasta at a certain point.
Yeah, and some of the genesis of your reporting for this book was, during pandemic times, and, you were getting into tarot cards and having hours-long Zoom conversations with your friends, and, just being online, being on Instagram and doing that, it was starting to worry you as you wrote.
Yes.
And, it stopped you, but that moment of worry sometimes sends people to the cult. Like why didn't you go by way of the cult, but what did you notice in you as you hit the break?
Yeah, I think so. So just for background, for people who haven't read about that part of things. So during COVID, everybody's like baking sourdough bread and, woodworking. And I was just taking a lot of online classes. That was just how I kept myself busy. And specifically, I started to take classes from this amazing poet in Portland who is a tarot card reader. And she would give these classes through literary arts about tarot and tarot history and art history and how that tarot can be like an artistic inspiration. It can lead to other pieces of writing and things like that. So really academic classes. But within those classes, I would start to see people talk about how much they believed like their fortune was being told in tarot. And I was like, I'm just not programmed like that. So I would start to have conversations with this friend of mine. We would do tarot like every Saturday night. We'd talk for hours about, oh my God, can you believe the crazy things that happened in the news today? And also like, let's do some tarot to maybe feel better. I started to worry, like, is this like how you become in a cult? And I would pull my husband Joe like into the Zoom call and be like, are we in a cult? And he's like, just don't worry about it. Like, it's okay to enjoy something. Like, I think you're fine. So, but I think that is my like reporter brain a little bit being like, so if it's not going bad for me, where does it go bad? Where does this become damaging? Does it become damaging? I also grew up going to Catholic schools, so things like tarot was seen as like the occult, like Satan and stuff. And, while that's not entirely scary to me now, I think, that kind of was in the back of my head, like, this is a bad thing. So, I started doing reporting, and then I realized like that was an overlap that I had with some of these people who objectively I couldn't disagree with more that are in the book. They also saw power in these cards or inspiration in them. So I thought, well, that's interesting. Like, it's not every day that I feel like I can find overlap with people I would consider to be pretty extreme.
Yeah, and going back to those Jesuit days, you selected Agnes as like your, as your, I don't know what you call it, but you selected Agnes, kind of a punk rock spirit, if you will.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about Agnes and what appealed to you about her.
Yeah, so Brendan is referring to an essay I wrote to promote the book. That was actually chapters that were in the book that were removed. So I don't let anything go. Like,
that's a great writer business thing to do. No wasted work.
Use it to promote the book. So nothing goes to waste. So when I was, I grew up, in a pretty like non-religious household, but I went to a Catholic high school and I went to a Catholic college. When I was in high school, I decided on my own to convert to Catholicism. And, my parents were like, okay, whatever, like you do you. And as a part of that, I chose a confirmation name. That's not something that's, done very often anymore, but I was pretty excited about it. So my confirmation name was Agnes, who is this wild, saint within the Catholic canon, a young woman who sort of spurns some Roman suitors, and because of that, they decide to kill her. and because she wouldn't have sex with them, basically. And so, they do everything to try and kill her. They like drag her through the streets, they stone her, and try to light her on fire, and nothing works. And so they chop her head off, as is done in history to women. And I remember at the time just thinking that was like so badass. Like, yeah, that's cool. Like, now it's so funny to look back on that, because I fell away from Catholicism because for many reasons, but one being that, women don't have a lot of power. And that was a thing I had to learn, as somebody who came in it wide-eyed and thinking, oh, you can be like Agnes, and, not really understanding what that story was used for in the Catholic canon. Yeah, so I think that, that's something that now I look back on who I was, and I think I've always been somebody that's interested in seeking, in spiritual seeking and entertaining ideas about spirituality or what lies beyond or how we got here and all those things. So it's been kind of fun to be able to apply that to journalism and try and, apply a super serious lens to a thing that's pretty squishy. People's spiritual ideas are not always like fact-based.
There's a moment in the book, about a third of the way through, where you wrote, there are times New Ageism feels like an unsolvable Rubik's Cube, a puzzle of never-ending correspondences and synchronicities and unprovable promises. It made me think of maybe the writing and the reporting of the book might have similarly felt that way, given how many moving parts are in the book. So, can you speak to that nature of all these pieces putting together, try to align something that is uniform and coherent and satisfying?
It made me feel crazy, very, very bluntly. How do you write about Lemuria? That's not a real thing. It's not science does not prove it. It's not possible for a landmass to sink into the bottom of the ocean. It can sink, but not drop away completely. So, but it's real to people. So to me, what is my job as a journalist? Is it to say well, this isn't real, so just disregard it? Or is it to take it, well, why do people want to just turn a blind eye completely to science and think about this concept as a real thing? And I think that's a good example. I think that this book also made me realize journalists get really high up on their horses about truth. I have also. But I think that this is a book that really plays with truth versus facts. What's true for me may not be true for somebody who believes in Lemuria. So I tried to apply a fact-based lens to things, to that fluid definition of truth. I don't know if that even makes any sense, but that's kind of where I was where I realized the research for this book was so extensive, where I'm okay, if I'm going to write about Lemuria or Atlantis, I got to read a lot about these things disproving it, things proving it to certain populations of people, so I can kind of hold this squishy waterbed of ideas in a way that I can, say something definitive about it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, given that, the book covers just a wide swath of characters in Lemuria, Atlantis, you name it. A lot of books can suffer from a sagging middle. Momentum can drag, and it's a struggle for all of us trying to keep the pace, keep the momentum going, to honor people's time to read 300 pages of whatever, fill in the blank. So how did you just navigate the writing of it so it did feel just even throughout and that you could carry a reader through?
I think that I had a really good editor on this book. So my editor, Maddie Caldwell, she came in, and would tell me, the middle is sagging here, Leah. There's some things, because at a certain point in the history of the New Age figures that I was writing about, I was writing a complete biography of each of them. So by the time you get to the fifth section of the book, where we're talking about Elizabeth Clare Prophet, you kind of don't need to know everything, because the ideas have now been talked about for the previous 4 sections. Again, it was this lineage of theft. So I think that was important for me when she gave me that feedback, because I realized it's really not about rehashing these ideas again and again and again. At this point, everybody knows what you as the narrator are saying about Lemuria. So keep it going. I also think that I started to rely on scenes, because as this book marches forward, in page count, you're also marching forward to the more modern moment. So I had a lot of Merv Griffin and Oprah Dr. Phil, that I could describe to sort of bring this out of this kind of gauzy historical place and more into like, this is how this is playing out in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. So the book gets a lot more scene heavy, and which for me as a reader, I kind of need that. Like I want it to move. And
well, yeah, it's real important to have not just quotes, but dialogue and white space on the page. It just accelerates the reading, and it pulls you in a way. It's like it's swimming down current.
Yeah, and there's a few places where like the chapters get really short. There's some that are really long, and then there's a couple of like palate cleansers where it's like just a really short thing, and that's because that probably was a very long chapter before that I just hacked down to 2 paragraphs.
Well, one of those palate cleansing paragraphs comes towards the end where you basically do a set piece, probably 2,000 words, maybe a little more, on lemurs. Like just there is actually something of a thematic tie-in with their societal structures. I'm sure you can talk to that.
I mean, lemurs are the unsung hero of this book. Like they really are. Okay, for the interest of this audience, hopefully this is interesting. So Lemuria was originally a theory floated by an ornithologist who was writing about why lemurs were present on Madagascar and in India. And, this is before the science of like plate tectonics and continental drift has been discovered or, written about. So he writes this paper that is published where he sort of says, perhaps there was a continent here that's how it was there, and that continent just fell into the ocean, and we'll call it Lemuria. That's literally his whole thesis. Later in life, he's like, yeah, that maybe wasn't such good science, but like at that point, it was out of the bag, and people within the spiritual community who were very upset about theories of evolution, hated Charles Darwin, were like, scientists are killing the mysteries of the world. They could lean into this story of Lemuria as like, oh my God, the lemurs were there. This was this beautiful civilization. People probably lived there, and they were like evolved. So what ends up being very like really ironic to me is that the people who ran the furthest with this Lemuria idea were people in the New Age, where women have a lot of power. In actual lemur society, it's a matriarchal society. It's like the only matriarchal primate species. And I found that to be really like sad because, the lemur population is totally endangered, is completely getting decimated by climate change and a variety of other things. And I just thought, isn't that funny that we as humans have to like create something completely fake where there's actually a thing that's an answer for this that we could all be like leaning into harder. So there's a lot of lemurs in this book. It's probably more interesting on the page than the way I just explained it, but go lemurs.
In the reporting of this and finding sources who are willing to go on the record who might experience some shame or discomfort talking either about the family members who went into these various belief systems and then the children of, say, Amy Carlson, how do you approach them to garner their trust so you can speak openly and try to just shed the most honest and true light on them, fair light as possible?
I think that I bet you and I have talked about this before, but oftentimes when I come to a story, I'm like the last person. Like, something has happened and like the media has come in and painted it a certain way or done good or bad reporting, maybe sensationalized it, and then they've all moved on to the next thing. And then here I come and I knock on the door and I'm like, hi, what has everybody else gotten wrong about this? I'm not trying to pander to people, but I am trying to understand the ways that I'm very, eyes wide open about that media doesn't always do a good job. So in this case, I was very aware of how Amy Carlson's death had been portrayed. It was kind of a big joke. And in some regards, I think people portrayed it as really sad. But I found her mom, and Amy Carlson went by Mother God, and I thought, well, what is it like to be the mother of Mother God? And so, very early on, before I even wrote my book proposal, I reached her and I just said, I've written about things like this before. I am not here to re-victimize you, but I think that there's a story in understanding Amy that might be really instructive. And she agreed, and that was great. So we didn't talk a lot at length, but I did talk to her children, Amy's sister, people who knew her through her life. And I'm really open with people that I realize I'm arriving in their lives to talk about something really hard. Someone dying, someone that they loved. And I take that really seriously. So I think that works to my benefit, that I'm like, look, I know that this sucks. And it's a weird thing for me to be asking you these things. So I'm just going to try and do my best. And if there's something you don't want to answer, that's okay.
Yeah, when you talk to Cole towards the end, it comes in the final few chapters where he appears, and Cole is Amy's oldest child, and who's the one who actually has something of a memory of her before she abdicated. He said something like, writing, you write about her, and then this is him saying it too. I think you write, instead she ended up, this is before she left, instead she ended up a manager at McDonald's, a single mother of 3 children. And he says, I think that in her mind, these were not things befitting of Amy Carlson. He called her Amy. He never called her mom. They were not important enough, big enough. You don't really have a choice in our system. You settle. I think a lot of people have to settle on something that's not their dream because they need to eat. They need to pay for the roof over their head. And I think that speaks to a kind of that quiet desperation, and certainly the vulnerability that leads people in these directions. And I think this book, in a lot of ways, is an exploration of the travails of vulnerability.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that. I thought that was really powerful, that Cole really seemed to have the most clear-eyed view of his mother. He was also really angry about what happened, but also he had enough of a distance. And I think that this is one thing as a reporter, there were a lot of other people that came in, and then there was a lull. And then I called. And I think that there had been time for people to process a little bit further about what this all meant. And I think that, learning Amy's story was really interesting. She was somebody who wanted to be a famous singer. She was really talented. She didn't get anywhere. That's a more common story than getting somewhere, I think, in America. So, he had these really smart ideas about that she wanted to live a great life. She was not living that life, and she was potentially suffering from some kind of mental health issues. And that combination of things just pushed her to create a life where she was a goddess. And that's just that. That's what happened. I heard this really great quote in a book I was listening to on the way down here this morning, that we want to make it so our monsters manifest, not or material, that they come out of nowhere and that they don't come from a circumstance. And so what I was trying to answer here is what culture produces a person that calls herself Mother God? What leads to that? And it turns out a lot leads to that. And it's, celebrity culture, it's spirituality, it's patriarchy, it's a lot of different things. So I'm glad this all came together for you in the book.
Without spoiling anything, because after I read the book, I always like going back to the opening chapter and just see what might echo. And you do there's something of a magic trick you pull off, something of a tarot card flipping. And without giving anything away, how cognizant were you of that if you go back to the front, you're like, oh, this reveals itself in a way that didn't the first time around.
Yeah, that delights me. Thank you for saying that. I because it's so writing a book is such a nerdy, insane thing to do. So when somebody else gets it, it's very cool. I think that when you read the first pages of this book, you are picking up a book with a big giant eye on the front that says it's about the fever dream of the American New Age. But the first chapter of the book is about the way the Earth formed. And so I wanted that to be a bit of a head scratcher for people. Wait a second, I thought I was reading a cult book, not a book about science. And the reason for doing that was I really wanted this to be grounded in that questioning of what is Lemuria? Is it possible for this, continent to fall into the ocean? And just how that simple question 200 years on has led to female gurus and right? It's a wild trip through the human imagination to to read this, I think, and like get to the end and go back and be like, oh my God, like why do people think of these things? So yeah, I was trying to do that. I wanted it to have that science-based reporting, but also the story of the end of Amy's life at the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. And you hear speaking of that scene building you were talking about, the tires crunching along the road up to their compound in Colorado, and then when you realize when you come to the end of the book, you realize where we are, or where we had been all along, and it's a pretty stunning reveal, and I'll just leave it at that.
Sweet. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, Leah, you've been on the show a number of times, but I always love ending these conversations by asking the guests, you in this case, for a recommendation of some kind for the listeners. Just anything you're excited about that you want to share, and it could be a brand of coffee, a brand of socks, a fanny pack.
I knew you're right.
Choice.
You always do this, and I didn't even think of it. So I'm going to say the book that I was listening to on the way down here blew my mind. It's called Someday We Will All Be Against This by Omar El-Akkad. He's from he's an Oregon writer. I think he's at some point lived in the Portland area. I believe he lives in the Willamette Valley. It's a beautiful book. It's really, really, really powerful. So I would recommend that. I also would recommend that we need ways to kind of unplug from all the terrors of the world. So I've been doing that by playing a lot of Zelda.
Oh my gosh, which one?
So I played Tears of the Kingdom.
Oh my, Ultra Hand.
It's, so dorky. I really think I recommend this. It's like therapy. It's just calm music and you just run around trying to find a horse. Mm-hmm. It's a great thing. Everybody needs it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, Leah Sottile, your work is brilliant. I'm so excited anytime I get to talk to you, and I love reading your work. I see your byline, and it signifies that, you know what, I'm in for a ride. And
awesome. Thank
you.
So
just thank you for the work you do, and thanks for coming down to Eugene for a live recording of the show.
Happy to do it. Thanks for everybody coming out. Appreciate it.
Hold your hand. Yes. Awesome. Had to turn down the gain, man. The gain knob was a little too high, friend. Another live podcast in the book. Ah, man. That was good. That was good. Thanks to Gratitude for hosting. Thanks for you for listening. Thanks for Leah driving down. I felt a lot better about that one. I was less nervous about it than the first one with Chandler Henderson. My anxieties were the following, and in order, and I quote, attendance, admittedly a little thin, but it was Palm Sunday, and it was a cloudless 65 degrees outside, so tough to get people inside on a Sunday afternoon like that. 2, tech, no issues, actually. Great experience. Feel pretty confident about that. There's always little improvements, but for the better, not because there are any real hiccups this time around. 3, the interview itself, but I slipped right into the pocket, and it was good, and I got some nice compliments from strangers, and it's always nice when you get someone like Leah who comes to play ball, and she drove 2 hours down the 5. We sold some books. We did the thing, man. I'm gearing up for the next book, the next book. I know I haven't even talked about the shit I'm doing for Prefontaine in terms of events. I'll get to that one of these days. That book's dead to me, man. It's old news. But it hasn't been published yet, BL. It doesn't matter. It's dead. Gotta move on. Not really, but gotta move on. But not really. As I've talked before, and once in my Power of Narrative talk, that I'm working on a way to figure out how to get it into the podcast feed or the pod stack, but that's neither here nor there. Don't worry about it. Part of that talk was failing to go all in on the research for the book proposal, and how that cost me a good 6 months of time I desperately needed. I came to a distinct realization, almost an epiphany, when I heard the 12-time women's basketball champion coach Gino Auriemma of UConn speak on the Dan Patrick Show. He was asked what his pregame speech was to his team ahead of the finals. He said, and I quote, again, this from the Dan Patrick Show, "I'm introduced at some events. Ladies and gentlemen, Gino Auriemma. He's lost 12 Final Fours." They don't do that. They say, Gino Auriemma. He's won 11 national championships. Now 12. So Nobody gives a damn about who loses. They just care about winning. So why worry about losing? Nobody cares. I try to make them understand to not be afraid to lose. That's what gets in the way of teams winning. The fear of losing is so powerful. It's my job to try and diffuse that as much as I can. Now, let me tell you, CNFers, I made sure I bookmarked that segment and I replayed it about 10 times to make sure I transcribed it perfectly. That summed up what I was doing with my Prefontaine book proposal. I wasn't writing it to win. I was writing not to lose. Half measure, not full measure. I came to understand that you should research as if a deal's in place, as if it's a certainty. Otherwise, and I didn't have the language to crystallize this at the time, I was playing to lose. In that spirit, for my next book, I bought myself a real nice hardcover notebook. And it's going to be a very John Steinbeckian diary of the next book. It's going to have all my contacts. I mean, I'm going to have digital backups anyway, but it's going to be an analog thing for all my contacts. So it'll be a phone book for all my sources. It'll have a day-by-day accounting of what I did that day, because sometimes at the end of the day, I often wondered, like, what the hell I even did. You know, for example, maybe I interviewed 2 people, left 18 voicemails and cataloged 100 articles, wrote 300 words and drank 40 beers. I want to make sure I have a record of that. I've long kept a journal, almost 30 years, and I often riff about my book work, anxieties and insecurities, etc., in the O'Mara Chronicles, as I named them back in 1997. But I plan on using this fancy new notebook, to riff on the bullshit I'm feeling on a given day as it relates to the book at hand. The notebook also is a symbol. It's a symbol of commitment. It symbolizes that I'm playing to win, not to lose. I could easily have used a 99-cent mottled black notebook, and it would have saved me $35. If you want to know the brand of notebook that I did get, I got the large Blackwing slate black dot grid notebook. Link in the pod stack. But that would have been playing to lose if I got the modeled notebook, even though it's perfectly functional. Oh, if this book falls through, I'd rather be out $1 instead of $40. I thought maybe just doing a long-running Google Doc that serves the same purpose with the added benefit of being easily searchable, not to mention no clutter, would suffice. Then I'd subconsciously begin my reporting and research with one oar in the water. In the end, maybe I do quote-unquote lose, but I'm tired of the losing attitude, which I've somehow made it this far in nearly 45 years on the planet, despite a rotten head. You know, for you, maybe it's saving up for a writing retreat or a long weekend in a hotel. Either way, putting that extra bit of skin in the game heightens the stakes. I don't want this beautiful notebook to sit on my shelf as a reminder that I played to lose instead of playing to win. I like the idea of having this one document, or 2 or 3, depending on how long the whole book process goes. But you understand, a compendium that serves as a record for the experience of that book. The 2 or 3 ups, the hundreds of downs, and a reminder to future me, hey, you've been here before, every book is new, you felt this way before, and you made it. You did it, and you'll do it again. It'll serve as a mentor for future me, and maybe by extension, future you too. So stay wild, CNFers, and if you can't do, interview. See ya.